Okay, with this, what I'm going to do now is I introduce the counterexample method. Now I'm just going to go over a couple examples. Okay, I have two arguments. They are invalid. You remember I told you the book, they're going to be invalid, so you don't have to wonder if they are or not. These are invalid, but let's say you didn't know that and you were looking at this. Let me read this. If the government imposes import restrictions, the price of automobiles will rise. Therefore, since the government will not impose import restrictions, it follows that the price of automobiles will not rise. If you look at that, I mean, you could study that, but can't you see how some people could look at that and these terms, government imposing import restrictions, the price of automobiles will rise, then the government won't and the price will not rise. It can be a little hard to decide if this is valid or not. Is that good reasoning, valid reasoning? Is this a good deductive argument? So you use the counterexample method, but it gives you an idea that there could be some arguments initially. You go, gee, it's kind of hard to tell. Like here's the second example. What if I read this? Since some employees are not social climbers and all vice presidents are employees, we may conclude that some vice presidents are not social climbers. There's a lot of verbiage in there, right? And so that can be kind of hard. Is this valid or invalid? So the counterexample method is a way we can try to test for this. So with this one here, let's isolate the form. So if the government imposes, import restrictions, we'll call that G. The price of automobiles will rise, we'll call that P. Since the government will not impose import restrictions, let's go ahead and call that not G. Right? If G is a government imposes import restrictions, not G is they won't. It follows that the price of automobiles will not rise. We'll make that not P, since the price of automobiles rising will be P. Okay? So if we were going to kind of write that out, if the government imposes import restrictions, then the price of automobiles will rise. Therefore, since the government will not impose import restrictions, not G, because therefore, here's the conclusion, but then they embedded, they inserted the premise here, the government will not impose import restrictions. It follows that the price of automobiles will not rise, not P. And there's a conclusion indicator phrase. Okay, so if G, then P, not G, therefore not P. So we've isolated the form right there, and then we're going to use terms below to create a substitution instance of the above argument form, okay? And for them to come up with the terms, remember the tip I gave you, they start with the conclusion, okay? If P is Abraham Lincoln is dead, the reason they probably chose this is not P would be Abraham Lincoln is not dead. So let's put in, you remember you start with the conclusion first and purposely make it false, intentionally. So not P is Abraham Lincoln is not dead, right? Now that's false, right? Because he's dead. Real life, okay? So P, Abraham Lincoln is dead, not P, Abraham Lincoln is not dead. So good, we've started out with our conclusion being false. So that's based on P. So P is going to be Abraham Lincoln is dead, and G is Abraham Lincoln committed suicide. So if we did the first premise, if Abraham Lincoln committed suicide, then Abraham Lincoln is dead. Now, is that true? If Abraham Lincoln committed suicide, would he be dead? Yes. So that's true. That's premise one. And let me go ahead and, okay, that's one right there. Premise one. And then premise two is not G would be, if Abraham Lincoln committed suicide, not G is Abraham Lincoln did not commit suicide. So Abraham Lincoln did not commit suicide. Okay, let's separate this out here. Okay, let me go P. All right, so let's change the ink here. So what we did is that we had if G then P, not G therefore not P. That was our original argument form right there that we isolated from this up here, right? From that argument. This whole thing up here got the form, it's right there. Okay? Then, with some experimenting, we came up with these terms that shows that it's invalid. Okay? Because we have true premises, true, and this one here is true. That first, so when we substitute those in and this one's false, if P is Abraham Lincoln is dead, not P is Abraham Lincoln is not dead, false. And then if Abraham Lincoln committed suicide, then Abraham Lincoln is dead. That's certainly true. Anybody who commits suicide is dead. Very sad, but it's true. And then 2, Abraham Lincoln did not commit suicide. That's not G. That's also true also. He was assassinated. So with this argument form, we have been able to slap back on this skeleton new meat, and we have 2 true premises and a false conclusion. Okay? All right, that's one example there. Let's go to another one here, the second one. All right, since some employees, we'll go E, are not social climbers, that's a premise, and the sense refers to this, and this is a compound thing. The sense also refers to that. So we know these are our 2 premises, because sense is a premise indicator word, and all vice presidents will use V, are employees. Therefore, we may conclude that some vice presidents are not social climbers. So if we were going to write out that, so there's our argument. You remember, if you read that immediately, this original argument, you know, it's not real obvious if it's valid or invalid. You got to think about it. I got to think about it. There's too much verbiage, too much words here. I'm going to just isolate the form and put on a substitution instance. So your form would be some E are not S, and your next premise is all V are E. Therefore, we may conclude some V are not S. Okay, so there is our isolated argument form, and we've kind of done the work for you here. Now we're going to put on a substitution instance with terms that are just a lot easier, so we can just tell by just reading it that something's wrong. So obviously, whoever came up, you know, the author of the book, when they came up with these 3 terms, you start with the conclusion first, and you purposely find terms that'll make the conclusion false. So let's do it down here. They have V as dogs and S as mammals. So we'll have some, we're working on the conclusion first, some dogs are not mammals. Okay, that is false. Okay, there are actually some dogs out there, they're not mammals. Okay, all dogs are mammals. Okay. So that means V is dogs and S is mammals. Okay. Now, all V or E. So we purposely made the conclusion false. V is dogs, S is mammals, so we'll go punch those in, and E is animals. So let's work on the first thing. Some E, some animals are not mammals. Okay. Some animals are not mammals. And that is true, right? Okay? Think of some animals you know, and they're not mammals, so that's true. And then the second one is all dogs are animals, okay? Because it's all V or E. All dogs are animals. Okay, so we have some, and that's true, right? All dogs are animals. Some animals are not mammals, and if I'm remembering this correct, a fish is an animal. It's not a plant, right? But it's not a mammal. A reptile is an animal, but it's not a mammal, right? If I got that right, boy, that'd be embarrassing. It's been a while since I've had high school biology, so I hope I got my classifications. I think I'm right here. Oops, that was... I want to do that. Okay. So some animals are not mammals. That's true. All dogs are animals. That's true. And then from this, we're supposed to then say some dogs are not mammals. That is false, since every dog is a mammal. Here, we're able to show, you see how it's easier? We can read this and go, some animals are not mammals, all dogs are animals, some dogs are not mammals. We immediately see there's something wrong here. We have true premises giving us a false conclusion, where it would have been a little harder with this one right here, right? Isolate the form, put in more familiar terms, and it's readily apparent that this is an invalid, this argument right here is invalid. The structure is an invalid structure. The bones are not all lined up. The skeleton is out of whack. Needs to go to a chiropractor. Okay? All right, and let me just say something right here at the end as we close. Please note the counterexample method can't be used to prove validity. This is an argument to demonstrate invalidity, and here's why. If you can come up with a counterexample with true premises and a false conclusion, this is the only arrangement that proves invalidity automatically from Table 1.1, right? See Table 1.1, only the invalid column contains an example in the true premises and false conclusion row. But you've got to be aware, just because you can't come up with a false conclusion from true premises, this does not necessarily prove validity, okay? The argument could be invalid because there are invalid forms that have true premises and a true conclusion. Here's what some people do. Gee, I can't come up with something that works. I can't come up with true premises and a false conclusion. And I've been working at this for an hour. So what we do is, if we can't come up with true premises and a false conclusion, we make the assumption it's got to be true. But that doesn't mean it's valid, because if you look at Table 1.1, you have invalid forms that have true premises and a false conclusion. I'll read one right here on Table 1.1 in Section 1.4. All wines are beverages. That's true. Chardonnay is a beverage. That's true. Therefore, Chardonnay is a wine. Chardonnay is a wine, that's true, but that still is an invalid argument. So here's the first thing people do. Oh, I can't come up with one. So that automatically means we have true, and that means it's automatically valid. No, don't forget, you can have true premises and a true conclusion and still have a bad structure. And the other thing is, so you don't know, it's still, you don't know for certain if it's valid or invalid just because you have true. The other thing is, Some people will work at this and go, man, I've been trying to come up with animals, mammals, cats, reptiles, plants. I'm working this, it's not working. I come up with a false conclusion, I plug it in, the premises aren't false, and then you think, aha, there is no true premises false conclusion. That is not necessarily so. Maybe there's one out there and you haven't been able to just think about it. Some students will work at this and go, oh, it's I can't come up with a true, false. They go to the back of the book, the starred problems, and by the way, in your book, when you're looking at the exercises, when you see a star next to it, it means that the answer is given in the back of the book. Sometimes you'll be working at something, oh, I can't think of anything. You go to the back of the book, and the author has thought of one. So that's why you can only use this method to prove invalidity. Okay? Just because you can't come up with something doesn't mean it's automatically valid. Maybe there is an example you haven't thought of, and that is very possible. And the other thing is, don't make the mistake, if I can't come up with a true, false, this means that it's true, because just because it's true doesn't mean it's automatically invalid. Or doesn't mean it's automatically valid, because here's valid. If you go to table 1.1, the row for true premises, true conclusion, you do have an example in the valid column, but you also have an example of true premises and a false conclusion in the invalid. So you still don't know, okay? So I've really given you a lot of detail here at the end. Let me, with everything I've said at the end here, let me read this paragraph without annotating it, okay? And if this part, it doesn't quite sink in, I'm giving you too much, don't worry too much about it at all. I just want you to know this. The counterexample method is used to test for or prove invalidity. It is not a positive test for validity. So let me just read this. Note, the counterexample method can't be used to prove validity. If you can come up with a counterexample with true premises and a false conclusion, this is the only arrangement that proves invalidity automatically. See Table 1.1. Only the invalid column contains an example in the true premises and false conclusion row. If you can't come up with a false conclusion from true premises, this does not necessarily prove validity. The argument could be invalid because there are invalid argument forms that have true premises and a true conclusion. Table 1.1 again. If you don't believe me, go look at the table. Also, maybe we have not been ingenious enough to think of an example of true premises and a false conclusion, and one does exist. It is only the deductive method of trying to falsify the conclusion that can guarantee that a true premises and false conclusion arrangement does not exist. Okay? And that's the test for validity that we talked about previously. Okay? Now, like I said, this last part about me stressing this is only the counterexample method only proves invalidity. If you couldn't follow me on that, don't stress that too much, okay? But it's an invalid test. To test for validity, you don't use the counterexample method. You use the other one where you falsify the conclusion and determine if there's a contradiction or not. Okay? If there is a contradiction, then you know the argument is valid. You remember, if there is not a contradiction, then you know that the argument... well, I'll leave it at that. Okay? If you negate the conclusion and there's a problem, you know the argument is invalid. This is not a test for validity. This is a test for invalidity. Okay, and no more talking. I'm going to stop. Okay, and next we're going to go on to Chapter 3, Informal Fallacies, which you're going to like those and find those really relevant. Okay.